Okay, so get ready, because we are going deep into astral projection.
Or, as it's formally known,
Yeah.
out-of-body experiences, OBEs.
OBEs.
Exactly, like,
Oh, Dr. Strange.
yeah, Dr. Strange when he's just floating around outside of his body.
Yeah.
Turns out that this is not just something that Hollywood made up.
Right. And you've actually sent over some really cool research on the connections between OBEs and
Dissociative disorders?
dissociative disorders. Because our mission today is to basically sift through all this research and see what science has to say about these experiences and how they might be tied to mental health. And we even have a case study
We do.
that we're going to unpack, which is pretty wild.
Yeah, before we get ahead of ourselves, though, what exactly is an OBE?
So basically, the research defines it as a visual hallucination,
Okay.
but a really specific kind. So imagine like looking in a mirror, but instead of seeing your reflection,
Yeah.
you're seeing yourself from outside of your body. So it's like a super detached mirror image.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah,
And while there are different categories of experiences related to self-perception,
right.
we're focusing on this OBE variant,
Oh.
like this disembodiment,
Got it.
where you feel like you're completely separate from your physical form.
So I always thought that OBEs were just something that happened during near-death experiences,
Right.
like the whole, light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, that's a common misconception.
Okay.
But the research highlights that OBEs can actually happen for a bunch of different reasons.
Really?
Yeah, you've got brain lesions,
Hmm.
certain psychiatric disorders,
Interesting.
even substance use,
Oh, wow.
migraines,
Okay.
epilepsy.
So it's not all about like dramatic life or death situations.
Definitely not. And this is where the link to mental health comes in,
Okay.
particularly dissociative disorders.
All right, so let's talk about dissociative disorders.
Okay.
Can you break it down in like layman's terms for those of us who aren't therapists?
Sure. So imagine like your thoughts and feelings, memories, even your sense of self, they're all like separate channels on a TV.
Right.
And suddenly they're not on the same frequency.
Okay.
And that's kind of what happens in dissociative disorders.
Oh, wow.
It's like a disconnect within your own consciousness.
That sounds incredibly disorienting.
Oh, it can be.
What causes that kind of disconnect?
Often it's rooted in trauma or periods of extreme stress.
Okay.
You can think of it as the mind's way of trying to protect itself from these really overwhelming experiences.
So is the research suggesting that OBEs could actually be a symptom of these dissociative disorders?
Exactly.
Okay.
And to better understand this connection,
Yeah.
let's look at this case study that you mentioned, the
Thank
one about the 15-year-old boy who started having these OBEs.
Yeah, this is where things get interesting because the research mentions that he had a pretty disturbing experience. Can you tell us a little bit more about what happened?
So he described feeling like he was floating above his own body and was watching doctors interview him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he could see himself from this third-person perspective, almost like a drone camera was following him, but he couldn't control this other self that he was seeing.
That's wild. Okay, so did the researchers have any clues about what might have been going on or why he was experiencing this?
Well, that's where his background comes into play.
Okay.
This boy had a really rough childhood, abandoned by his mother at a young age, potentially dealing with an abusive father. I mean, you can only imagine the stress and trauma
Right.
that he had been through. He even had a history of running away from home.
That's heartbreaking. So did the researchers suspect there was a connection between his past and these OBEs?
They did.
Okay.
And they were incredibly thorough in ruling out other possible causes like drugs or neurological issues. Ultimately, they diagnosed him with dissociative identity disorder.
Which used to be called multiple personality disorder.
Exact. And dissociative fugue, which involves memory loss and often unplanned travel.
So it really seems like his traumatic past was a major factor in these episodes where he felt detached from his body.
That's what the research suggests. Yeah, this case really highlights that powerful mind-body connection.
Right.
Trauma doesn't just affect us emotionally.
Yeah.
It can manifest in really unusual ways physically.
So his mind was trying to cope with all this stress and trauma. And this detachment was a way of doing that.
It's one theory.
Okay.
The research mentions this tussle between conscious and unconscious,
Right.
where repressed trauma might actually resurface in these unexpected forms.
Like OBEs.
Like OBEs.
Wow, that makes you wonder how many people might be having these experiences, not even connecting them to their past.
I know, it's pretty amazing.
Did this boy get any treatment for his condition?
He did. They treated him with a combination of medication,
Okay.
antidepressants, and anti-anxiety drugs. and therapy.
What kind of therapy are we talking about?
They used a technique called abreaction,
Okay.
which helps patients process and release repressed emotions.
Interesting.
He also underwent hypnosis and relaxation training.
So they were really hitting from both sides,
Right.
the psychological and the neurological. Did it work?
It did, but there's another twist.
Okay.
During one of his abreaction sessions, he had another OBE.
Wait, he had an out-of-body experience during therapy?
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, it just shows you how powerful and unpredictable these experiences can be,
Right.
even in a controlled setting.
Wow.
But the good news is the treatment ultimately worked.
Okay.
He went through a period of inpatient management, and eventually all of his symptoms, including the OBEs, disappeared.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So medication and therapy together helped him overcome the disorder and stop these terrifying out-of-body episodes.
Exactly.
It really emphasizes what you were saying before about addressing both the mind and the body.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it makes you wonder, what's actually happening in the brain during an OBE?
Right.
Like, how is it creating this sensation of being outside your own body?
Yeah.
It's one thing to say that it's a hallucination,
Yeah.
but what's the mechanism behind it?
Right.
The research must have some insights into that.
It does. There are specific brain regions that seem to be involved,
Okay.
and they're all tied to our sense of self and body awareness.
Okay.
One of the key players is the temporietal junction.
Okay. Temporal junction. Not a word I use every day.
Right.
What does that do?
So think of it as your brain's GPS for your body. Okay, it takes in all of the sensory information, like what you're seeing, hearing, feeling, and it uses that to create a map of where your body is in space.
So if that area isn't functioning properly,
Right.
you might get a distorted sense of where you are in relation to your surroundings.
Exactly, and that distortion
Yeah.
could lead to those out-of-body sensations. The research also points to the angular gyrus, which plays a role in processing visual and spatial information.
Got it. So if that gets disrupted, it could mess with your perception of your body.
Precisely, think about it during an OBE.
Yeah.
People often describe seeing themselves from above,
Right.
almost as if they're floating.
Like that teenager in the case study,
Exactly.
watching himself from the ceiling.
Exactly, and that altered perspective
Yeah.
could be linked to disruptions in the angular gyrus,
Okay.
which helps us understand spatial relationships.
So we've got these two key brain regions, that temporal junction and the angular gyrus,
Yeah.
that seem to be involved in OBEs.
Yeah.
Is it that simple? Like, if these areas malfunction, you'll have an out-of-body experience.
Well, it's not quite that simple.
Yeah, okay.
It's not just about those specific regions.
Yeah.
It's about how they communicate with other parts of the brain.
Okay.
For example, the areas responsible for processing emotions and memories also play a crucial role.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's this complex interplay of different brain functions.
So the brain is essentially orchestrating this whole experience,
Right.
drawing on information from all these different areas.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if we could pinpoint exactly how this happens.
Right.
Could we actually induce OBEs?
That's a fascinating question.
Yeah,
And it's one that raises some ethical considerations.
for sure.
You know, while some people might be curious to try it,
Yeah,
it's crucial to proceed with caution.
right. Especially considering what we've learned about OBEs and mental health conditions like dissociative disorders.
Exactly. Inducing an OBE in someone who's already vulnerable
Yeah.
could potentially worsen their symptoms or even be re-traumatizing.
Right. So even though OBEs might seem fascinating, we need to respect the potential risks
Yeah.
and not treat them like some kind of thrill ride.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And if you're experiencing OBEs on your own,
Yeah.
especially if they're causing you distress or interfering with your daily life, it's always best to talk to a qualified health professional.
Right.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here. The causes of OBEs,
Yeah.
the brain regions involved, the potential risks of inducing them. What else can we learn from the research?
Well, one of the big questions that comes up with OBEs
Yeah.
is whether they're evidence of something beyond the physical body, like a soul or spirit leaving the body.
Right,
It's a question that science really can't answer definitively yet.
right. That gets into some pretty deep territory.
Yeah.
What's the scientific perspective on all that?
Well, from what we understand so far, OBEs are neurological phenomena.
Okay,
There's no concrete evidence to suggest that they involve a separation of consciousness from the physical body,
okay.
but it's important to remember that science is constantly evolving.
Right.
What we know today might change as we continue to explore the mysteries of consciousness.
That's a good point. So for now, science says it's all happening in the brain,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't necessarily diminish the experience for the people who have them.
Right.
It could still be profound
For sure.
and even life-changing.
Exactly. It's important to respect those individual experiences,
Yeah.
even if we don't fully understand them from a scientific standpoint.
Okay, so how do we reconcile these different perspectives?
Right.
The scientific view that it's a neurological event
Yeah.
versus, these personal accounts that might suggest something more mystical or spiritual.
I think it comes down to critical thinking.
Okay,
It's about recognizing the limitations of what we currently know,
right.
but at the same time, being open to exploring different possibilities. It's not about choosing sides,
Right.
but rather embracing the complexity
Yeah.
and mystery of these experiences.
I like that, embracing the mystery. This deep dive has definitely pushed me to think differently about OBEs.
Yeah,
It's not just about spooky stories or paranormal phenomena.
right.
There's a whole world of neuroscience and psychology at play.
It's a fascinating topic.
It really is.
It really challenges our assumptions and pushes us to consider new perspectives.
It does. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. What are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Right.
What do we really want them to walk away with?
Yeah.
I think for me, the biggest takeaway is that OBEs aren't just some fringe phenomena.
Right, yeah.
They're real experiences that people are having. And there's this growing body of research trying to understand them.
And while there's still a lot we don't know, science is pointing to the strong connection between OBE's mental health and brain function. It's not about proving or disproving anyone's beliefs, but rather, approaching these experiences with an open mind,
Yeah.
but also a critical eye.
So we shouldn't just dismiss them as just imagination or delusion.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we should be cautious about jumping to paranormal conclusions.
Exactly.
There might be a perfectly scientific explanation, even if we haven't fully uncovered it yet.
Right. And if you're experiencing OBEs,
Yeah.
it's crucial to seek professional help,
Yeah.
especially if they're causing you distress or disrupting your life.
Right.
It could be a sign of an underlying condition, like a dissociative disorder, that needs to be addressed.
Even if someone isn't having OBEs, I think this whole deep dive has been really insightful.
Yeah.
It just shows you how much we still have to learn about the brain and consciousness. We often take for granted this everyday experience of being in our bodies, but when that gets disrupted, it really makes you question everything.
It does, and it makes you appreciate the incredible complexity and potential of the human mind. Who knows what other fascinating discoveries are out there waiting for us as we continue to explore this inner universe.
That's a great point. So this deep dive has definitely left me with a lot to ponder.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what about you? Have you ever had an experience that felt like you were outside your own body? Maybe a moment of intense daydreaming or something during sleep that felt incredibly real?
It's certainly something to reflect on, and, if you're intrigued enough to explore further, there are plenty of resources out there to help you understand these experiences, whether from a scientific, psychological, or even spiritual perspective.
Absolutely. And the important thing is to keep those minds curious.
Yeah.
Keep asking questions and keep exploring the wonders of the universe, both inside and out.